Hey, it's real good to be back here again with you,
Thank
Dr.
you.
Mahan.
Certainly glad to have you in Georgia again.
Well, these are such interesting mounds we're at here, and I have reason to believe that probably you can share this better than anyone else because you've been around here a little while. I'm going to just turn this over to you and let you share with us.
And that's right. You do like to get out of most of the work, though.
That's true. God bless you. Thank you, Dr. Mahan.
Anyway, he is certainly right. This is a favorite spot of mine, and one that's, of course, very important to anyone who attempts to study the history of the American Indians from earliest times until now. Actually, as far as personal memories are concerned, and I'm going to indulge myself a minute here, the last few days I've been remembering that I came down with my father once when Warren King Moorhead, the famous archaeologist from Phillips Exeter Academy in Massachusetts, was digging in the one mound that we can't see from here really between the other two. And this had to have been in 1928 because he was working here between the time that they finished crops in the fall until they were ready to plant in the spring again. And he worked in 1926, 27, and 28. And I was 7 years old in 1928, so I expect that's when it was. Anyhow, there are only about two things that I remember, except that standing looking in the big hole and people moving dirt in wheelbarrows. But then a man came to talk to us, and I suspect Mr. Lewis Tomlin was undoubtedly with us. And this gentleman made one impression on me. He had on a very strange hat of a sort I never had seen before. And only later did I find out that this was Warren King Moorhead and his famous pith helmet. You know, the real archaeologist type that he wore everywhere he went, I think. Then there are certain other memories about it that I will tell as we walk through the site and in the museum itself. First, I do want to catch you up on a little bit of the history of the site here because it does have some interesting incidents as well. They were discovered, as far as our own knowledge of them is concerned, in 1817. At that time, Elias Cornelius, who was the president of the American Board of Commissioners for Foreign Missions in Boston, came down to see about the new mission that his board was establishing at the foot of a little mountain just south of the Tennessee River. This was the Brainerd mission, and it was located in what is now southeast Chattanooga at the foot of what has ever since been known as Missionary Ridge. The mission was going along very well, and the Cherokees were giving it reasonable acceptance. And while Mr. Cornelius was there, certain Cherokee leaders told him that they were holding a conference or a council in a few days with a group of the Creek leaders on the banks of the Etowah River, and invited him to come along. They did so, and they arrived here in the middle of October and held 2 or 3 days of conference. And then it came Sunday, which was the 17th of October. I checked up one time. And the Cherokees, out of deference to Mr. Cornelius, suggested that they not hold their council on his holy day, that instead they take off and observe Sunday, in other words. And then came Sunday afternoon, and it was a warm Sunday afternoon and nothing else to do. Mr. Charles R. Hicks asked him, wouldn't he like to go see the large earth mounds that were nearby? And Cornelius records in his journal that, of course, he was interested. So they walked the couple of miles or the distance here on, and when they got here, the site was completely overgrown with very large trees. He mentions as much as 4 feet in diameter, some of them, and they were poplar trees and others. And they couldn't even see the big mound until they were just at the foot of it. And they could, of course, see the moat, which then surrounded almost the entire site, but it was hard to walk even. but he had no way of measuring them until somebody suggested that they cut a grapevine, which they did, and a reasonable length of grapevine. So all that afternoon, the Cherokees dragged the grapevine around for him, and he recorded the number of grapevines it was from one point to another, and then got home, of course, and translated the number of grapevines into the number of feet. And doing so, he would manage to get very close to the height of the big mound, which is 65 feet, 56 feet, I think, of the highest point above the present level out there. But there's also 5 feet of alluvium settled around it, so it was originally 5 feet higher above the ground level than it is now. Anyway, after a while, the Cherokees told him, he began asking them about the history of it. And I don't think they told him the complete truth, to be honest about it, and I have good reasons. I know it wasn't so much what they told him that wasn't right, it's simply all they didn't tell him. They told him that it was not built by themselves, that it was built by people who were here before them, the Cherokees, and in this I think they were perfectly right. They said they had never made any use of it, except that during the Creek War, some 70 years before, they had fortified the top of Mound B, which is the smaller of the two mounds, the one to the left as you look at it from this point, and for their women and children, to keep them from being attacked by the Coetus with whom they were fighting. Cornelius later wrote his trip here in considerable detail, along with the measurements and all, and published it in the very first edition of Stillman's Scientific Journal, which was published in Washington, D.C., and that edition was in 1819. And he said that apparently the Cherokees knew nothing about its use. But the very same year that Charles R. Hicks came down here with him, he met on occasion with the Tennessee historian John Hayward, whom he happened to know a little better and had more time and all, and he explained some of the religious significance and other details of the mound to John Hayward, who was the Chief Justice of the Tennessee Supreme Court and did a very famous history of early Tennessee, in which he says that the mounds were built by Indians and not by the mound builders, which ran completely contrary to what most people had been conditioned to think then. Now, there have been other visitors here, one at least, that I'd like to tell you a little something about. And this is William T. Sherman, who appeared on the same platform with Henry Grady, the Atlanta editor, at a sort of reconciliation meeting of the New England Society in New York in 1886. And Mr. Grady was to be the principal speaker. And when he got there, on the speaker's platform right next to him was the now aged General William T. Sherman. And they were very civil and spoke to each other and all. And when Mr. Grady got up to speak, he acknowledged the presence of everybody, including General Sherman, he said, who was well remembered in his hometown of Atlanta. The only trouble was that most people thought he was a little too careless with fire. General Sherman laughed politely and turned red. And nonetheless, he came here first in 1844. He tells all this in his 2-volume memoirs. It's no secret. He had graduated from West Point that spring, and he came to Marietta to meet with a panel of Army officers there to discuss and review certain local claims that had been made against the United States Army and for timber at Fort Buffington and other things of this sort. I thought Mr. Bubden would get a little kick out of this. And when they had their hearings, the reason was it took 50 years to settle that particular one of it, but hopefully they got some things settled quicker. But instead of taking a stagecoach to go to Huntsville, which was the next place they were going to hold hearings, General Sherman recorded that he hired a horse because he wanted to see the countryside between Marietta and Huntsville, and that he rode north along the line of the new state Western and Atlantic Railroad, which was then being built by Irish laborers, and marveled at those hills and how the depth of the cuts and the kind of engineering that it was taking to get the railroad through there. But he also made note of the fact how difficult indeed it would be to move an army through that particular terrain, particularly if the enemy was around there possessing those hills somehow. And of course he remembered this 20 years later, as I will record in a minute. But he arrived on this side of the Etowah River and was told that there was a remarkable group of Indian mounds close by. So he rode off to see it and arrived at the plantation house of Colonel Lewis Tumlin. And Colonel Tumlin turned out to be a very genial sort of individual and showed him the mounds and told him about them. And he stayed 2 or 3 days with the colonel, and they became very good friends. And Sherman says in his memoirs that they corresponded for several years afterwards. And that in May, when he rode into Cartersville, under somewhat different circumstances, he rode immediately to Colonel Tumlin's house to assure him that no damage would befall his property or anything. And when he got there, the colonel had already refugeed. So Sherman says, I spent the night in Colonel Tumlin's house once again. But next morning, and this is the part that interests me, it must have been the 19th of May, 1864, he says he got up and rode his horse down and took another look at the famous mounds. And we have no reason in the world to doubt that he did. But what is interesting, we know that directly across the creek that morning, at the mouth of the river, at the mouth of Pumpkin Creek, there was a Confederate artillery position. And I suppose if those Confederate soldiers saw a lone horseman riding around over here looking at these hills, they probably didn't, but if they had, they wouldn't have wasted a salvo of artillery on just one horseman. So General Sherman rode away to other activities and remembered the mounds and remembered them 20 years later when he was writing about them. The first archaeology that was done here, I'm going to tell you in a minute from another location. But certainly a little exploration was done in the 1850s. And this is reported by Charles C. Jones, Jr. in his Antiquities of the Southern Indians. Jones was a Georgia historian of the period and a very thorough one, and he also believed that these were the works of ancestors of the contemporary Indians and not of some mythical mound-building race, as had been said before then. Now, those of you who read the National Geographic have seen in the current issue a very good story on recent archaeology at this site at Etowah, and some very fine reconstruction drawings done by George Stewart, who was a young archaeologist here and participated in part of the work in the early 60s, and his reconstruction of the village. And if you haven't seen one of those, you should do it. And we're going to go to the spot where I think one of the drawings was made showing the mounds in perspective, and I'll talk to you from that location. We are now inside the museum, and the exhibits in here are very good. They contain a great many very fine artifacts, most of which have come from Mound B, because as we have already seen, it is the only one of the mounds that has been excavated. The material taken out during the 1950s and 60s was preserved much more effectively than was the case with Moorhead and with Thomas at an earlier time, who really had no good preservation techniques at all. But the shell and the copper and wooden objects and even the cloth that was found during the 1950s and 60s were preserved by Louis Larson and others who worked with him. And one piece that they preserved better than had been possible to do before was one of the shell gorgets, of which you see several examples in the case beside me here. These were ornaments that these priests wore on their chests, And they have symbolic meaning and mythological meaning. In other words, some of which are probably known to living people and some may not be. But the more we understand about them, we realize that these are people from the who are indicating and proclaiming their descent both from the sky and the earth. One of these gorgets has written across the middle of it a line of intelligible writing using the Libyan alphabet from North Africa in a form used roughly in the 5th or 6th century, or a little earlier, BC. And the archaeologists did not pick it up. After it was put into the exhibit here, all of us passed by and looked at it and commented upon the fact of its preservation and the curvilinear decoration it contained and other things of this sort. Mrs. Gloria Farley, who is one of the founding members of the Isaac organization and has spent the past several years all over the North American continent almost studying writing of the American Indians and of foreign people who came here, walked into this museum one afternoon in 1983 and pointed this particular item just like a bird dog does his prey. She said it's Libyan. It's in the Numidian language. And of course, she identified it. We made some photographs of it. Very shortly afterwards, Dr. Barry Fell, who is the leading epigrapher in the country, took photographs and, of course, agreed with her, as did various other scholars. They published in the December 1983 issue of the Epigraphic Society Occasional Papers, a story of how the gorget came to be located and about Mrs. Farley identifying it. And then it has been transliterated here, which means that they have reproduced the characters as they appear on the gorget. And of course, the equivalent Roman letters, as nearly as you can come, underneath. And the translation, of course, there's some symbolism involved, I'm sure, but roughly it means a religious omen or a token to lead you by the right hand, and that is the translation that it so I think that it would be interesting to get a close-up of that particular item. These are the two marble figurines, statues that are shown in the article in the current National Geographic, along with George Stewart's description of the circumstances under which they were excavated in 1954. The models to the left are in scale and show the burial of the two figurines toward the end of the occupation of that mound, as it seems from archaeological evidence. There is, of course, the temptation to say that they are being buried against some plague or against some conqueror or some certainly disturbing influence. They were certainly in the temple which stood on the top of the mound, or the series of temples which stood on top of it as it was enlarged from time to time. They are sculpted from Georgia marble. They were tested after they were found, and they are the same as some of the marble very near Tate, Georgia, which indicates that they were undoubtedly made in Georgia. They represent, in the light of what is now known about the religion of the mound period in this area, the earth and the sky. In other words, the figure representing the earth is, or the earth mother, is the one on the left, the female, and the sky dwelling teacher, Shawano, the eagle serpent man, or the sky being, is the one on the right. There has been considerable speculation about the postures they are in which they are shown. The lady kneeling in one position and the gentleman in another. Various people have said that he represents the lotus position in the Buddhist religion, but it's not quite the lotus position at all. But it is a position that certain of the mystics who are studying this lately says has to do with the flight of the spirit from the individual to the sky. And they believe that, as the ancient people did, that with certain other ceremonials and by getting into various positions, you can achieve certain mystical effects. Be that as it may, these were very important items, and of course the discovery of them has attracted a great deal of attention. I'm happy to report that soon after they were discovered here, before this museum was built, the Columbus Museum constructed special cases that they could be transported without scarring, and contributed them to the state of Georgia in turn for being allowed to display them for a while. So they were first publicly displayed in the Columbus Museum. The original ones are now at the National Gallery on loan. So the sign says here before you. But that is the story about those, and of course I have pointed out already where they were located in Mound B of these three mounds. Now, I mentioned in the discussion of Mound C that many of the barrels taken from there by the Smithsonian in the 1880s, and by Warren King Moorhead, and also by Kelly Larson and others in recent years, were carefully worked embossed copper, which show no indication at all of having been done from a coal-hammered copper. But this copper was obviously smelted and rolled into very thin sheets. and then pressed onto a carefully carved, very hard die. And the result is what we call it's embossed, in other words. Now, the figure to my right here is one of the dancing man-eagle or man-hawk figures that represents a man in the guise of a hawk carrying a mask which can replace the one that he's wearing, and he becomes a man, and he becomes predominantly human instead of hawk-like. The buns on the head of the male figure that we have just seen are reproduced here in wood, and they were covered with copper and worn on as headdresses by some of the people whose burials were uncovered in Mound C. The middle one there is an ornament, as is shown, worn on a shell necklace embossed in the copper dancing eagle figure, as he's called. And this is the central column of a conch shell, worked down to make a pendant. Then there are even smaller and finer examples of the neck piece or the gorget that was worn by these people. Up here are copper-colored wooden ear spools. And then at the top there is one of the eagle figures and a couple of the so-called bilobed arrows, which were worn as parts of headdresses, and had some symbolic meaning related to the sun, I think. These priests were buried in their ceremonial costume, and a part of these were elaborate feather headdresses. And here is one reconstructed from evidence that was found in this actual burial. And there were enough remains and evidence of the feathers to give the approximate number of them and the approximate length. Then these copper items that are shown in the cases on the wall were worked into the feathers in the original, as the reproductions have been there in this reconstructed headdress. So these, with some of the woven fabric capes and other garments that they wore, some of them carefully covered with feathers, the down of which had been woven into the fabric as it was made. And of course they were dyed into the various colors. All of this was a very elaborate type of costume, which if you had met one of these people, I think you would have taken notice of them. And in fact, one of the Uchi friends told me one time when he was up here that he always did say, and he had heard, that these people like to make good first impressions when they appeared somewhere. Because the story among the Tuckabachis, who I believe were the closest relatives among the Creeks of the people who inhabited this area, tell in their old stories 2 or 3 significant things that relate to the sky people or priests here. One is that they came from the earth from the sky in a canoe, or another man says a boat, which is a translation of some kind of vehicle in which they came, and that they taught various skills, including writing and metalwork and agriculture and various craft skills, and that there were 7 originally, and one went back, and others were here, and that there was always one of them represented among the Tuckabachis. And these people were called the Well, those of you who have read my dissertation, and very few people have, will remember that there were 4 divisions of the people whom we call the Shawano, which equates with most of the Uchis. And their names in Uchi translate eagle, serpent, man, persons. And you remember that there were 4 divisions of them. One of them was the Ispagogis, who I think were here for various reasons. There were also the Kispagogis, who were their friends and equivalents and relatives among the Shawnees and others on the Ohio Valley. There were the Muskogulgis, who were the Tuckabatchee people themselves and the Creeks. And then there were the Muscovies. And the closest place any of us have ever been able to locate those Muscovies is, guess where? Southern Russia. Thank you. I'm standing on the inside of the moat, which was as you can see, a very large ditch, which we believe originally completely encircled the mounds from the river to the north, all the way around to a point south and west of the mounds themselves. It is now partially filled, of course, from erosion, but it was originally some 20 feet deep and at least that wide. And there were locks or control dams at the end of it in which water could be held. It flooded in high rains, and when the water was high, in other words, and they apparently maintained water in here for probably 2 reasons. One, of course, it was defensive, because about where I'm standing on the inside of the ditch, all the way around, there was a palisade of large logs, evidence of which are still in the ground, upright and 2 feet or more, some of them in diameter. So it was probably 12 feet, 10 or 12 feet high. And there's reason to suspect that there was a walkway inside of the moat on which archers could stand and defend the place if it was necessary. Anyway, the village area that again is shown in the illustrations in the National Geographic are between the mounds and me, and on, of course, to my right, seem to have been the principal area of the city which surrounded it. and in which there were approximately 5,000 people living, it seems, by the very best guess, at the time this place was last at its fullest occupation, which may have been right around the year 1400 AD. There's very good reason to think that something had happened and the population was in decline before the year 1550, when Hernando de Soto came through the area. Now, I have talked a great deal about Mound B, and we will look at it in a minute. It is the one that you cannot see from where you are now. But I do want to tell you a few things, as long as this is a sort of general discussion about the mounds and their history. The large mound back of me has been called Mound A since certainly the time that the Smithsonian worked here in the 1880s. I've told you once before it's about 56 feet high as it stands now, and the top has a flat area almost as large as a football field on the top of it. Up there live some very important personages that I think and were most certainly the kings, or the sun kings, of the kind that De Soto encountered in several spots in 1540. These were important personages who rode in litters and had traveled around with as many as 70 attendants or more, elaborately dressed, we're told, and I suspect in some of the costume that we have already seen. What Mound A contains has been a matter of great speculation from early times, but circumstances have prevented it ever being excavated to this point. However, I'm going to tell you a little personal story that has been told about it. When I was maybe 12 years old, or old enough to have a real interest in the Indians and in these mounds, I came here with my father to visit Lewis Tumlin, who was his longtime friend. And Mr. Tumlin, of course, was very interested in the mounds, and when I asked some questions, he would tell me certain things about them and what had been found where. But he particularly told me on more than one occasion that there's a very large chamber inside the mound. And I would ask, well, how do you know this? And he told me that looking to the upper right from where you are now, the corner that points toward the northeast, or north, anyhow, the north, that when he was a 10-year-old boy approximately, there came a very long rainy spell and some wind, and one of the large trees on the mound blew over and fell down the side of the steep mound and exposed a large area where the roots had been. And below that was an open area that had crumbled, had fallen in. And while they were speculating on what had happened and how to get this hole filled, Mr. Tumlin's little dog fell into it and worked his way on down into the mound itself, and they could hear him barking in there, and with much reverberation, like it was a very large empty chamber. And of course this made a considerable impression on Lewis Tumlin, age 10, with his dog in there and no way to rescue him. But his father said it was much too dangerous, of course, for anybody to attempt it, because it would continue to cave in. So they filled the hole with dirt, and the remains of the poor dog, I'm sure, are still inside there. There are other stories about it, of course. One, as I've already told you, the Cherokees said that the one that they occupied once in time of war was the one to your left on the screen, and that is Mound B. And it is, as you can see, not so large as Mound A, but it's almost the same size as Mound B, which was the one, as we know, seemed to contain the temple over which the priests presided and which around which they were buried at various points. Just to the right of that mound, Dr. Moorhead did some excavations in the village area when he was here and found all the evidence of ironworking. He found slag, and he found pieces that clearly of iron that had been ore that had been melted in what we'd call pig iron. And he reports in his report, not entertaining at all the idea that these people might actually have manufactured iron. This was just known not to be true. He said that he had determined that an early owner of the property used his slaves to manufacture, in an effort to manufacture iron, and that this was the result of their work. The Tumlin family never quite thought this, even though they had a great regard for Warren Moorhead, but they knew very well that Louis Tumlin I did not work iron. He was a major stockholder in the Cooper's Iron Works and others just up the river from here in the 1850s, where iron was being manufactured professionally. So there was no need of this crude effort here on the riverbank. And since we now know that iron was manufactured in similar villages to this all along the Ohio River, I think I'm safe in telling you that iron was manufactured at Etowah as well. Of course, there's still a great deal more to be learned from all of this, and that is what we're about today. Thank you. Just now I told you that apparently in 1927 I came somewhere to about this location, and the big mound back of me was at that time largely a hole in the ground and a lot of dirt piled around. This was the excavation of Dr. Warren King Moorhead, who dug the mound, he said, completely in 1927, 26, and 25. In the 1880s, beginning in 1884, the Smithsonian dug it completely, according to the report by Cyrus Thomas in the 12th annual report of the Bureau of American Ethnology. They were the ones who had brought out the large copper plaques showing the dancing eagle figure, and they discovered the very first day that they began excavations here, according to the Athens newspaper in the fall of 1884, that they had uncovered a very long stone crypt in which was an unusually large individual buried with some elaborate beads and other things, and writing on the top of his tomb. And exactly what they called writing, I don't know, because it became fashionable among archaeologists later to say that, of course, these people did not write. So no writing had been found yet. We have tried, several people, members of Isaac, have tried to see if by any chance that stone got taken to the Smithsonian, or got reported, or got photographed. And so far as we've been able to tell, yet none of the above. It must have been left and completely ignored. Anyway, Cyrus Thomas was of the just undeniable opinion that all of the development, of course, of the American Indians had been here in North America, and that the people at these big mound centers were American Indians. And according to him, fairly recent ancestors of the tribes that were known in this area in historic times. And all that being true, they could not have done very much. They had simply reached a stage somewhere just beyond barbarism, but not quite to civilization. Dr. Moorhead, who worked in the 1920s, didn't change his views very much on this. And when he obviously discovered an iron foundry, which I think will one day be excavated further, he could not believe it, and he didn't believe it, and he offered an illogical explanation for it. I was here on many occasions when the state of Georgia, after they bought this property in 1953 and began an excavation under Dr. A.R. Kelly, and later Louis Larson and Stuart Neitzel and others, and they were much more cautious about saying that these people didn't have any kind. They were fully aware that they were a highly advanced people, that they were expert cloth weavers, that they were metal workers, and that obviously a great deal of education of some kind went on, because people aren't born with all this, with this particular type of knowledge or information. Dr. Kelly spent some time excavating a site just to the right and at the foot of the mound here, which is Mound Deep, and by all appearances this thing was a craft school. There was evidence of communal eating. There were small compartments, looked almost like the compartments in a Buddhist temple or college, as they were called. And there were evidences of stoneworking and pieces of copper that had been trimmed and carefully, certainly, indicating they had been cut from some of the copper ornaments in the process of their being manufactured. And there were a group of the Uchis, some of the older men down here one day, I remember, who had come from Oklahoma to see it. And Dr. Kelly was explaining to them about the training school or the men's club that he had found, and they were much amused because they told him, yes, indeed, there were such things, but they weren't exactly clubs. They were rather strenuous, long-time teaching processes. So there's still a great deal more, of course, to be learned about these, and Etowah is one of the spots that I think will continue to produce information as they're studied. And as I've said before, the recent article in the National Geographic is one of several things that has appeared lately that is helping to call attention to it. Well, listen, there's one more thing that you might ought to say, and that is that the mound is now very carefully reconstructed on the original base of it. Lewis Larson was able, digging down, as I said, they got about 5 feet of completely undisturbed mound and the burials at various times in there, because it was below where the earlier archaeologists had thought the mound extended to. And taking what was clearly the outer edge at its latest development is the dimension of the mounds now, and they used the dirt that had been piled around through the years to rebuild the approximate size and certainly the base dimensions of it. Is right. And the temple stood on top. And from some of the accounts of temples in the DeSoto period, and from an account of the French, of the several French accounts of the temples of the son of the Natchez, we think we have a pretty good idea of how the temple looked, and that a fire did burn in it probably all the time, and so on.
Is this just wash off here?
No. The best explanation seems to be that there was an enlargement in process, or else there was a ceremonial reason for a platform there. And the excavation, it was excavated down this way somewhat and pulled down from the top up there, so that when they were cultivating the top of the mound in early times, they could get the farm equipment and all up there. So it has that much been changed. And when they first plowed up there, they came in some pieces of pottery and little clay objects and evidences that there had been some buildings up there and so on.
They grew stuff up on top of that?
Oh, yes. They used to raise a bale of cotton a year up there. You've heard that, haven't you, Walter? And Mr. Lewis said if they didn't, that if they didn't raise a bale of cotton, it wasn't a good cotton year. That was sort of the gauge. As I have told you, for certainly more now than almost a century and 2/3, people have been fascinated by the large earth mounds that are around us here this afternoon. They were first seen in 1817, that we have in our written history. They certainly were occupied for several centuries by a people who we are now quite sure were ancestors of a great many of the living Native Americans of the southeastern area. It was a very complicated society of which they were part. And there was a great deal of status according to tribes, and then a great deal more according to clans. And the priesthood here undoubtedly belonged to a clan that had to do with the sky and also with birds. And I did know several of the older tribesmen connected with this area. And one of them was Chief S.W. Brown, Jr. of the Uchis, who was the hereditary chief. And he attempted to explain one time to a group of us about the birds. And he had a daughter who was one of these people that had read a great deal and was very educated, and undertook to help her papa every once in a while. And they had been recently to see the Seminoles. And the Seminoles had all run out when they saw Chief Brown and grabbed him around the neck and invited him into their houses and so on, because he was a member of the Bird Clan. And Miss Dorothy was telling all of us about this, that her papa and the Seminoles that he met down there all belonged to the same clan. He said, we are all bird clans, but I didn't attempt to explain to them that there were at least a dozen different types of birds involved, and I was one bird and they were another. So like everything else, the more you examine these things, the more complicated they become. But it's almost certain that the people who were here were involved with the birds that we normally associate with peace. There's a lot of indication that some of these are probably crane feathers that are in the headdresses. What we know generally of the religion of the man and the hawk or eagle that's represented is a peaceful, rather complicated, but most interesting theology, not unlike that we find in ancient Egypt and elsewhere in the whole world. And so it's my hope that somebody who stands here and talks about this 50 years from now will know a lot more to tell you than I know today. But it's been interesting and fun to have you. Thank you. Most of what I've had to say this afternoon, of course, relates to the work that I do rather continually as president of the Institute for the Study of American Cultures. And the purpose of the Institute, which we call ISAC, is to uncover just the kind of information that I have suggested needs to be recovered even yet. And we would be happy to have any of you with interest in that direction as ISAC members. If you want to be a regular member and receive the ISAC report, and beginning the 1st of January, the report of all the material that goes into our computer, the data bank that we are calling the Magellan file, you have only to send $30 and a membership form. And if you don't have a membership form, give us the normal information of your address, your telephone number, and that will be sufficient. We'll send you a membership. The other thing is that we are attempting to put the material, and all that I mentioned today is either in the ISAC data bank or in the research center, or will be. I will have a copy of Elias Cornelius's article from Benjamin Stillerman's journal, if that has not been copied already. We do have parts of Cornelius's diary, and I will see that the entire section that has to do with the visit to Etowah is included. We have the report by Warren King Moorhead, which is a fairly rare book, published for Andover Academy in 1932, I believe, by Yale University, in which he calls the Etowah Papers. And there is his own report and a couple of others by people who worked with him here on what they found. That will be a part of the ISAC data bank. It's fairly rare. I will not attempt to, I guess we will include Cyrus Thomas's article purely on Etowah, but it's part of a 400-odd page book, the 12th annual report of the Bureau of American Ethnology, which is available elsewhere. So,
for those of you who are interested in learning more about ISAC or in joining ISAC, we'd like for you to contact us, and we'll send you a small brochure which explains ISAC and has an application on the inside of it. If you can write to ISAC, which is the Institute for the Study of American Cultures, Post Office Box 1658, Columbus, Georgia, 31902, we'll be very happy to send this to you. We think that we have an outstanding educational opportunity, and we think that we will hope to do our part to correct and write a portion of American history that has not been there previously.
Une klana iuweji igaguya hona nagujosa wiulose igaguya hona.